The moment my aunt's SUV disappeared around the bend, I understood something I'd been too naive to see my entire life. I was standing alone at Gate C12 of Charlotte Douglas International Airport. No wallet, no phone charger, 4% battery, and a boarding pass that had expired 40 minutes ago while I was in the bathroom throwing up from nerves. The terminal was emptying out around me. The gate agents were rolling their cart away. And somewhere above the clouds, my aunt and her family were already settling into their seats, ordering complimentary drinks, and, if I know them at all, laughing. Let me back up. Because if I just tell you what happened that day, you'll think I'm exaggerating. People always do. They hear your family left you at the airport, and they picture some kind of mix-up, a miscommunication, somebody who looked away for a second. That's not what this was. I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina, the second of 3 kids. My parents divorced when I was 9, and my dad remarried fast, within a year, to a woman named Christine who already had 2 kids of her own. I'm going to call her my stepmother, though she never once acted like one. My mom did her best, but she was working double shifts at a hospital laundry facility most of my childhood, so summers and holidays I usually ended up staying with my dad's older sister, my aunt. The woman who, 26 years after I was born, would leave me stranded at an airport in Charlotte, with 4% battery and nowhere to go. My aunt was the kind of woman who made everything look effortless. Big house in Mooresville, right on the lake. Her husband had done well in commercial real estate before he retired early. They had 2 sons, both older than me, and a daughter, Paige, who was my age exactly, and had been my closest cousin for most of my life. Or at least I thought she had been. I spent nearly every summer of my childhood at that lake house. I learned to water ski there. I burned the roof of my mouth on my aunt's sweet potato pie at every Thanksgiving I can remember. I thought that family was mine just as much as my own. What I didn't understand until much later is that there is a difference between being included and being welcomed. I was always included. Invitations were extended, a spot was made at the table, a bed was cleared in the guest room. But welcomed? That's something different. That's when people want you there. When your absence would leave a hole. I was never that. I was a courtesy. A habit. A girl they'd always taken in, because it was the right thing to do. Not because they couldn't imagine the holiday without me. I didn't figure that out until I was standing in Terminal C watching the departures board flip my flight to Cloas D. The trip had been my aunt's idea, which is part of why I never saw it coming. She'd called me in February, this was about 2 years ago now, and said she was planning a family trip to Cancun for spring break. All-inclusive resort, a full week, and she wanted me to come. You work too hard, she said. You need a vacation. I was 32 at the time, managing a dental office in Durham, single, saving money aggressively because I was trying to put together a down payment on a house. A free trip to Mexico sounded like exactly what I needed. Looking back, I should have noticed the signs. Paige never called me to talk about the trip the way she always used to call me to talk about things we were excited about. My aunt handled all the logistics, and kept saying she'd send me the details, and then wouldn't, and I'd have to follow up. When she did send the itinerary, my name was listed at the bottom, separately from the rest of the group. I told myself it was just how she organized things. We were flying out of Charlotte, which meant I drove up from Durham the night before and stayed at the lake house. That part felt normal. My aunt made dinner, my cousin's kids ran around the backyard, her husband sat on the deck with a beer and asked me how work was going. I slept in the guest room that used to be mine every summer. Everything felt fine. The morning of the flight, things started moving fast. We had a 10:45 departure, and my aunt wanted to leave the house by 7:30. I was ready by 7:15. I had my passport, my boarding pass on my phone, my one carry-on bag. I came downstairs and the kitchen was already half cleaned up. The coffee pot was off, and everyone was moving toward the garage. Here is where I made my mistake. I asked if I could use the bathroom quickly before we left. My aunt said yes, go ahead. I was in there maybe 4 minutes. When I came out, the garage door was already going down. I ran. I actually ran through the kitchen and into the garage, and I was yelling, wait, I'm here. And I watched the back of the SUV, a black Tahoe, I will never forget it, roll down the driveway and pull into the street. I was standing in the garage in my shoes and my carry-on bag, watching the taillights disappear. My first thought, genuinely, was that it was an accident. That in the chaos of getting everyone loaded up, they just hadn't realized I wasn't in the car yet. I called my aunt immediately. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called Paige, same thing. I texted them both. I'm still at the house you left without me. Please come back or wait at the end of the street. No response. I called my aunt's husband. He picked up on the second ring, which told me immediately that they had their phones. "Hey," he said. He sounded completely calm. "You're going to need to get an Uber or something. We can't be late." And then he hung up. I stood in that garage for probably 2 full minutes not moving. Because I couldn't process it. We can't be late. Like my being left behind was a scheduling inconvenience. Like the solution was just for me to figure it out. I grabbed my bag and went back inside. My hands were shaking while I opened the Uber app. The closest driver was 12 minutes away. I did the math and I knew before I even booked the ride, that I was not going to make that flight. Charlotte Douglas is 35 minutes from Mooresville in good traffic, and it was 7:45 on a Monday morning. There was no version of this where I made it, but I booked the Uber anyway, because what else was going to do? Sit on the garage floor? I made it to the airport at 9:02. Check-in for my flight had closed at 9:00. I ran from the Uber drop-off through the terminal, past the check-in counters, past security. I didn't even have time to think, and I got to gate C12 at 9:18. The gate agent looked at my boarding pass and shook her head slowly. "I'm sorry, honey. Door's been closed." I heard myself say okay. I don't know why I said okay, nothing about it was okay. I found a seat in the terminal and I just sat there. My phone was at 4%. I hadn't eaten breakfast. I had $43 in cash in my wallet. I remember the exact amount because I'd pulled it out the night before to cover tips during the trip. And my debit card. I had no idea what the rebooking fee for my flight was going to be, or whether my aunt had purchased my ticket in a way that would allow me to rebook at all, because she had booked everyone's tickets together. That's when it hit me. She had booked my ticket, which meant my ticket was tied to her reservation, which meant I couldn't do anything with it without her. I tried calling again, voicemail. I texted nothing. I sat at gate C12 for 20 minutes trying to reach someone in my family and getting nothing. My phone died at 9:41. I walked to the nearest charging station I could find, and stood there with my phone plugged in, watching it slowly come back to life, and I thought about what was happening. Not just the airport. Everything. Every summer I'd spent at that lake house, feeling grateful that they included me. Every holiday where I'd brought a dish and helped clean up and tried to be useful. Tried to earn my place at the table. Every time I'd told myself that my aunt loved me in her way, that Paige was genuinely my friend, that I was part of this family. I thought about a comment Paige had made at Christmas the year before. We'd been talking about the lake house, and she'd said something offhand about how her parents were thinking of selling it. And I'd said I hoped they wouldn't, that I had so many memories there. And Paige had looked at me with this expression I didn't know how to read at the time and said, "I mean, it's our house, Celeste." Just like that. Our house. Like I'd been confused about whose it was. I hadn't been confused, I just loved it. But she needed me to know I didn't belong to it. When my phone got to 11%, I called my mom. She picked up immediately, the way she always does, and I heard her voice say, "Hello, baby." And I started crying so hard I couldn't speak for almost a full minute. She stayed on the line. She just stayed there saying, I'm here, take your time." I told her everything. She listened to all of it without interrupting, which is something she has always been able to do. This patience that she developed through years of working in a hospital, where she had to stay steady no matter what was happening. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "How much do you have in your account?" I told her. She said, "Don't rebook with the airline yet. Let me look at what it's going to cost." While she looked, I sat on the floor next to the charging station with my back against the wall. A woman about my mom's age came and sat down near me to charge her own phone. She glanced at me, and I must have looked a mess because she asked if I was okay. I told her what happened, the short version, and she looked at me with this expression that I still think about sometimes. Not pity. Something more like recognition. Like she had seen something like this before and knew exactly what it meant. She said, "Some people will always show you who they are if you give them long enough." Then she handed me a granola bar from her bag and asked if I'd eaten anything. I hadn't. I ate the whole thing in about 45 seconds. Her name was Rosalie. She was in Charlotte to visit her daughter. She'd been at the airport for 2 hours because her flight was delayed and she was just looking for somewhere to sit and charge her phone, same as me. We ended up talking for almost an hour. She asked about my job, my apartment, what I wanted my life to look like. Normal questions. The kind that feel enormous when you're sitting on an airport floor after your family drove away without you. My mom called back. Rebooking the flight was going to cost $312. More than I'd planned to spend on anything during the trip. I told her I'd figure it out. She said she was going to Venmo me $200 and I should not argue with her about it. I didn't argue. I thanked her, and I didn't let myself feel bad about it, which was its own small victory, because my whole life I'd been conditioned to feel like a burden when I needed anything. Before I found the rebooking counter, I pulled up my messaging app and scrolled back through the last 6 months of texts between me and my aunt. Reading them from the outside, as if they were someone else's conversation, was clarifying in a way that felt both obvious and devastating. Her messages were always short, always responsive but never initiating, always slightly formal, in the way people are formal with acquaintances they're being polite to. Mine were longer, more enthusiastic, more detailed. I was always the one saying I was looking forward to seeing everyone. I was always the one following up. I had been maintaining a relationship that only existed in my own mind. I sat with that for a long time, long enough that Rosalie gently said she thought my flight was probably going to board soon and I should go take care of what I needed to take care of. I stood up and thanked her, and she gave me a look that felt like a blessing, and I walked to the customer service counter. The rebooking took 40 minutes and 2 phone calls, because my aunt had booked the tickets through a third-party site and it was complicated. I will spare you the details. The woman at the counter, whose name tag said Deb, was the kind of airline employee who has seen every possible variety of human chaos and approaches all of it with the same measured competence. She got me on a flight at 2:15. I would arrive in Cancun 5 hours after my family. I found a seat near a window and I called my mom back and told her I was rebooked. She said she'd been praying. I told her I knew. Then I called my best friend, who I've known since we were both 7 years old, and living 3 doors down from each other on the same street in Greensboro. Her name is Simona, and she has approximately 0 patience for nonsense. I told her what happened, and she was quiet in that specific way she gets, when she is choosing very carefully what she is going to say. And then she said, "So what are you going to do when you land?" I hadn't thought about it in those terms yet. I'd been so focused on the logistics of getting there that I hadn't thought about what happened when I arrived. My aunt's family would be at the resort. I was booked in a room there. Was I supposed to just walk in and act like nothing had happened? Simona said, "You need to decide before you get on that plane who you are going to be for the rest of that trip. Because you can shrink yourself down and make it easy for them, or you can just be yourself and let them be uncomfortable." I thought about that for the rest of the time I sat waiting for my gate to open. By the time I boarded, I had made a decision, not a dramatic one, not a confrontational one. I wasn't going to make a scene at the resort or ruin anyone's vacation. I was just going to stop pretending. I was going to stop laughing at things that weren't funny. Stop being the first one to help clean up. Stop managing everyone's comfort. I was going to be polite, and I was going to be fine, and I was going to let them sit in what they'd done without giving them the relief of my forgiveness. I landed in Cancun at 7:08 p.m. My aunt had texted twice while I was in the air. The first message, sent at about noon their time, said, "The room key is at the front desk." The second, sent around 4. "Let us know when you land." Not "I'm sorry," not "we should have waited," not "what can we do," just logistical information. "The room key is at the front desk." There was also a text from Paige that said, "Mom said you missed the flight. That really sucks. Dinner is at 7 at the main restaurant if you make it in time." I read these texts in the back seat of the resort shuttle, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not anger anymore. The anger had burned out somewhere over the Gulf of Mexico. What I felt was closer to clarity. Like a fog I'd been living inside of for 32 years had finally lifted, and I could see the landscape for what it actually was. I checked into the room, which was a nice room, a king bed, a balcony looking out over the ocean. I stood on the balcony for a few minutes listening to the water, and trying to remember the last time I'd looked at something beautiful, without immediately thinking about who else would appreciate it, who I could share it with, whether I was taking up too much space, enjoying it alone. Then I changed clothes and went to dinner. My aunt's table was near the window. There were 7 of them. My aunt and her husband, Paige and her boyfriend, both of my male cousins and one of their wives. They had already ordered drinks. The table had a centerpiece with a little candle in it. It looked like a normal family dinner at a nice resort in Mexico, and I walked up to it and pulled out the empty chair at the end and sat down. My aunt said, "Oh good, you made it." Like I'd been delayed by traffic. My cousin said, "Long day, huh?" Paige passed me the breadbasket. No one said anything about what had happened. No one asked how I'd gotten to the airport, or whether I'd had trouble rebooking, or how much it cost, or what it was like to stand in a terminal alone with a dead phone, and $43. They just passed me the breadbasket and handed me a menu, and my aunt started telling a story about something that had happened at the pool that afternoon. I ate my dinner. I answered when people spoke to me. I did not perform warmth. I did not laugh at things that weren't funny. When my aunt said something that was clearly a bid for my appreciation, a comment about the trip being her treat, how she always tries to bring the whole family together, I looked at her and said, and moved my fork around my plate. She noticed. I could see her noticing. But she didn't say anything, and I didn't say anything, and the dinner ended, and I said goodnight and went back to my room. I spent the rest of that trip doing something I had never done before on a family vacation. I rested. I ordered room service one morning instead of joining everyone for breakfast. I sat on the beach alone for an entire afternoon with a book I'd downloaded at the Charlotte airport, and I read the whole thing. I went on an excursion by myself to a nearby cenote, and I swam in cold blue-green water and had a local guide explain to me how the Mayans believed those underground pools were entrances to the underworld. I took a picture of the water and thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. On the second-to-last evening, Paige found me at the pool bar and sat down next to me. She ordered a drink and looked out at the ocean for a while before she spoke. "Are you mad at us?" she said finally. I thought about the question. "I'm not mad," I said, which was the truth. "Because you've been kind of, I don't know, distant. I've been having my own vacation," I said. "Is that a problem?" She didn't know what to do with that. She turned her glass around a few times and then she said, "My mom felt bad about what happened at the airport. She just, you know how she gets when she's in logistical mode. She said she thought you were already in the car. She didn't think I was in the car," I said. "Your dad told me to get an Uber when I called. They knew exactly what was happening." Paige was quiet. "I'm not going to make this into a big thing," I said. "I'm not looking for an apology. I just want you to know that I understand now, and I'm going to act accordingly from here on out." "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means I'm done auditioning," I said. She didn't respond. We sat there another few minutes and then she said she was going to find her boyfriend, and she left, and I finished my drink looking at the water as the sun went down over it. On the flight home, I'd rebooked my return flight separately, so I wasn't on the same plane. I made a list in my phone's notes app. Not an angry list, just an honest one. Things I was going to change. I was going to stop showing up to events where my presence was a courtesy. I was going to stop measuring my worth by whether my aunt's family included me. I was going to redirect the energy I'd been spending, maintaining those relationships, into things that were actually feeding me. I was going to call my mom every Sunday, which I hadn't been doing consistently, because I'd gotten into the habit of thinking the calls were burdensome, when the truth was, she loved them, and I loved them too. I was going to let Simona be as important to me as she actually was, instead of treating her like a backup option while I chased the approval of people who would leave me at an airport. When I got home to Durham, I sat in my car in my apartment parking lot for a while. Not because I was upset, just because I wanted to mark the moment somehow. I'd driven to Mooresville on a Thursday night, feeling like I was part of a family, and I was driving home on a Sunday night knowing I wasn't. That's a significant thing to know. It hurts in the specific way that only true things can hurt. But there was something underneath the hurt that I hadn't expected. Something lighter. I'd been carrying around the weight of their opinion of me for 32 years without realizing how heavy it was. And now that I understood it would never be what I needed it to be, I could put it down. I went inside. I fed my cat. I opened all the windows because it was a warm April evening and the air smelled like the neighbor's wisteria. I poured myself a glass of water and stood in my kitchen, in my apartment, in my city, and I thought, I am going to be okay. My aunt texted me a week after we all got home. It said, "It was really nice having you along. Hope the rebooking situation didn't cost you too much." I read it twice. Then I set my phone down and finished making dinner. I didn't respond that night, or the next day. Not because I was strategizing or trying to make a point, just because I genuinely had nothing to say that would have been honest and kind at the same time, and I decided I was only going to do things that were both. I eventually texted back something short. Something that acknowledged her message without opening a door. And then I went back to my life, which turned out to be fuller than I'd realized. Once I stopped measuring it against a table I was never actually meant to sit at. The down payment on my house came together that October. I signed the papers on a Thursday afternoon and called my mom on the way home. She cried a little. I cried a little. Simona came over that weekend with champagne and a plant for the porch, which she said every house needs. I think about that granola bar sometimes. The woman at the charging station, Rosalie, who handed it to me without making it a thing. Who sat with me for an hour asking normal questions. who told me that some people will always show you who they are if you give them long enough, and then got up and caught her flight without looking for anything in return. There are people in this world who make room for you. Not out of obligation, not as a courtesy, because they genuinely want you there, and your presence makes something better. I spent 32 years looking for that in a family that saw me as a guest who'd overstayed her welcome, and what I found instead is that those people, the ones who actually make room, they turn up in the strangest places. Airport terminals, old friendships you almost let fade, the kitchen of the house you finally bought yourself. That's enough. It turns out that's more than enough.